BraowardBulldog.org, your local, not-for-profit, nonpartisan, independent news. First, we'd like to say a quick thanks to our title partners, Nova Southeastern University and Boardroom Communications. They truly helped make tonight possible. We also want to thank our other sponsors who are listed on the back of the program. Most of you know Michael Connelly as a best-selling crime novelist. I met Michael nearly 30 years ago when we both covered crime at the old Fort Lauderdale News. In 2005, he wrote a nonfiction book about police reporting called Crime Beat. And there's a quote in there that I like. The irony of crime beat journalism is that the best stories are really the worst stories. The stories of calamity and tragedy are the stories that the journalist lives for. It gets the adrenaline churning in your blood and can burn you out young. But nevertheless, it's a hard fact in the business. Our best day is your worst day. Michael knows that irony very well. He reported plenty of those kinds of stories years ago while working the crime and mayhem beats here in Fort Lauderdale and later at the Los Angeles Times. In his books, it's his books that now crackle with the suspense and energy that used to be in his stories. Newspaper stories. And they're informed and enlivened by his ongoing reporting from the street. He seeks what he calls the telling detail, the singular scrap of information about people that captures the essence of thought or action to reveal truth. Over the last 20 years, Michael has written 25 novels and sold over 50 million books worldwide. Work has been praised by critics across the country, serialized in the New York Times magazine, and made into movies like The Lincoln Lawyer in 2011. Truly remarkable achievements. Here to talk with Michael about his life, including growing up here in Fort Lauderdale, is South Florida mystery fiction columnist Aline Cogburn. She was honored this month by the Mystery Writers of America with its prestigious Raven Award for outstanding achievement in the genre.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all for coming and giving your support to the Broward Bulldog and also to Michael Connelly. Michael, your family moved here when you were about 12 years old, and you attended St. Thomas Aquinas. I knew there's some people here. How did growing up here affect your eventual career as a crime novelist?
Before I answer that, let me just say a couple things. I also want to thank Dan for inviting me and all of you for supporting the Broward Bulldog. I think it's an important thing that they're starting, or they've more than started, that they're carrying on, and I think it deserves the community's support, so I'm glad to be here because of that. I also want to thank Doreen, who's probably somewhere in the back, for putting this show on, and all the organizing that went into it. And I should say, so that I'm not taking sides, I actually went to Cardinal Gibbons, Fort Lauderdale. I went to Fort Lauderdale High, and then I went to St. Thomas.
Okay. So, get everybody covered.
You don't want to know why I had to change schools a lot, but I did travel around this town when it came to schools. And so your question is, how did it form me or affect me? We would not be sitting here. My career would have been something else if it had not been for many reasons pertaining to this area. My father was in the building business. I was following a path of probably going to pursue that, but things happen, but just as in anyone's life, I think two key things that happened to me were, first one was when I was just a teenager and I was a witness to a crime or part of a crime. I saw somebody hide a gun down by the drawbridge on Sunrise Boulevard, and he had just shot someone, and so I was kind of taken into this alien world that I had no knowledge of, and that was a detective bureau. And I spent a night in a detective bureau telling several people, what I saw, giving witness statements, looking at lineups, and that kind of changed my world. From that night on, I was very interested in crime and reading about it in the newspaper, moving from just reading it in the paper to reading true crime books, and then eventually crime novels, and eventually that sparked the interest in me saying, I want to do this. And then the question is, well, how do you get to a place where you're writing crime novels or any kind of novel? And in conferring with my parents in the living room of our Fort Lauderdale house, it was suggested that I go into journalism and get a press pass that would allow me into police stations and and to crime scenes, and it would be kind of like on-the-job training, and I would gather, as Dan said, hopefully those telling details that I could then use in fiction, and so that's how it went. I came back here after school and worked for the Fort Lauderdale News and the Sun-Sentinel, and I still count 1 week. I was there for 7 years, but 1 week is the most important week of my whole career, because it's actually a political thing. We had a very high murder rate happening. This is in the mid-'80s. And the police department was not looking that good. So we went to the police chief and said, let us put a guy in the homicide unit to track them and to write about how hard that job is and how relentless your detectives are. And the chief bid on that, and I got the assignment. And so it was a week of full immersion into the world of homicide cops. And that week has a resonance that's gone through all my books. The guy in charge of that unit, I would say, is the one Harry Bosch is most based on. And so it all really comes back. Even though I write about Los Angeles for the most part, it really is anchored or rooted in this town.
Now, in addition, you left the Sun-Sentinel to cover crime for Los Angeles in 1987. And I think the first day on your job there, you said there was a gift that was kind of given to you, an incident. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was, a lot of this stuff all came together at the same time. In 1987 I think it was July of 1987 that I spent that week with the homicide squad, and a month and a half later I left to go to Los Angeles. I had been writing fiction at night. I'd written a couple books set in Fort Lauderdale, actually, about cops and detectives, and they were missing something. No one's ever read them other than me. They weren't worth to be read by anyone.
Are they ever going to be on eBay?
No, I don't think so. In fact, one of them is lost to the ages. I don't even know where it is.
Okay.
I still have one. But they're missing something, and that made me want to shake up my life. I realized I couldn't keep trying to do this. My wife and I were planning to have kids, and I either had to make this happen or put that dream aside. And I thought one of the things that might help me realize it is to really dramatically change my life and not have the comforts of living in my hometown, of going out somewhere, and also going to a big city. So I got a job at the LA Times and moved out there. And it's funny, that story about the week I spent with the homicide squad was published here long after I left. They sat on it for like 6 months, I think. And I was already a reporter at the LA Times when it ran here. But anyway, when I went out to LA, I have this background of unfinished books, of books that are missing something. And the day I arrived, there had been a big heist where thieves had tunneled underneath a bank and gone up and spent a Memorial Day weekend, in fact. I think it was Memorial Day weekend. No, it was the Labor Day weekend, because that's when I moved out there. Spent the weekend, the 3-day weekend, drilling open safe deposit boxes and getting away with a lot of stuff. In fact, today, all these years later, it's never been solved. But because I was a reporter, it was like kind of like what we talked about when I was sitting with my father in the living room and saying, your press pass can get you into these worlds. I got to sit in on a briefing in the detective bureau in the LAPD where they showed slides and all the details of how these thieves did this really well-planned heist because they got away with it and they wanted to alert everybody for signs to look for. And so I got all these details like within almost 24 hours of starting my job, and it was like a light bulb immediately saying, I can build a story around this. Obviously I got to have the character that does this, but I had just spent a week with this guy named George Hurt, who I thought was the character that I could turn into fiction. And so it was like one of these mystical things that in the course of maybe 6 weeks, I had this incredible week with the Real Homicide Squad. I moved 3,000 miles away, and then I was handed the bones of an interesting plot.
And that plot became The Black Echo,
Right.
1992, which won you your first Edgar for Best First Novel. Now, 20 years later, did you ever expect to still be writing about Harry Bosch?
No, you can't. You can't even expect to be writing. I mean, it is a. I'm very diligent. I have a really good work ethic, and I think I can write well. But all that doesn't really add up to any kind of longevity. You just can't foresee how long you can do it, how long a character might last in your imagination. So I've been very fortunate that for some reason that character, Harry Bosch, basically you get to an end of a book and you say, obviously the book's over, but am I finished with the character? Is there anything else to say? And with him, when I come to that question, I always think there's a lot to say. And so it's been very lucky. But if I had planned to keep him going for 20 years or more, I certainly wouldn't have started him at age 42 and aged him in real time, because
Right.
I'm in a real bind here right now that I'm running out of time with him, in his current form as a working police detective.
Well, he certainly has become one of the most iconic characters, I think, in the world. How do you keep him fresh?
You're going to ask me a lot of questions that I'm going to just say it's mystical, man. You know what? I don't know how I keep them fresh. I mean, there's some basic things you like rules of the road that you never repeat yourself, but
Right.
and that you can never keep the character static from book to book. There's always got to be some kind of new turmoil, new obstacles for the character to overcome, and you can always bring old obstacles along with you, but there's got to be stuff new. And it again, a stroke of luck for me is that he's anchored in a place that changes faster than the people that live there, and so there's always some kind of new cultural or social wrinkle happening in the city of Los Angeles that allows me or helps me keep Harry going, keeping him fresh, I think.
I think so too. And your books are very much about LA. I mean, LA becomes a real character in those books. Now, you live in Florida, but you do go back there a lot for research. Has your research and the way you approach the city changed since you moved to Florida?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like laser-guided research because I'm not living out there. So when you live out there, I mean, this was part of the plan. I mean, I moved back to Florida largely for family reasons, but also for creative reasons. The same reasons in a way that made me move 3,000 miles out there, made me move 3,000 miles back, and because I wanted a different way of being creative in the writing process, to go out there, have a list of things I got to see, physical research, the locations I'm going to write about, spend time with the kind of people I write about, lawyers, cops, judges, detectives, and then come back and write about it from afar. And I think it taps. They're neighbors, but it's a little bit of a different creative muscle, I guess you'd call it. And so when I did that about 10 years ago, it did shift the way I write, and I think it renewed me and hopefully renewed the characters and everything about what I do.
Oh, yeah. Now, when you lived there, I think you moved around a lot. to kind of get different feel. Was that on purpose, or we just kept getting kicked out of places?
A little bit of both. No, I mean, it was a little bit by design. I lived there 15 years, and I lived in 7 different places, 7 different neighborhoods. And it was to try to, I mean, you're never going to get a place like, it's kind of like South Florida. You're never going to get every angle covered when you're writing about a place like that. And, so I was trying my best to see the city from different angles.
Now, in your book, The Drop, which came out a couple years ago, you kind of put in motion a plan for Harry to retire. How long will Harry be with us?
Well, retiring and how long he's with us are 2 different things. I mean, I came to it from being a reporter, so I thought, in the early stages, what do I have that not necessarily is unique, but what dimension do I bring to this, as you know, crowded field of crime fiction? And one was, I had really good access to one of the most controversial, biggest, and really good police departments in the world. And so I wanted to bring that. And so I've always had this overarching desire, plan, whatever, to bring, obviously Harry Bosch is fictional, but to anchor this fictional character in a reality and verisimilitude was something I had to have in all the books. And so, you live by that, you die by that. And so it's not going to make sense that Harry at age 66 is a police detective. He's already older than the oldest homicide detective in LA. He's 62, Harry Bosch is. The oldest guy is like 58, So it reaches a point in my mind, it might not bother any readers, but if it bothers me, it's going to infect the book. So it's reached a point where I have to acknowledge it in the books and have a plan, and that's why I set that plan in motion, that he's under a contract, that he has so much time left.
Well, one of the things about your books, I've always felt they're very realistic. Some mystery writers, the character is forever 31, and it's, book after book, how long can she be 31? But there's a sense of realism in your books that I think has always been there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reporter in me.
Right.
It's a choice that every writer makes when they're writing a book, and if they get the opportunity to write about that character again, do they keep them as is or age them, advance them? What brought me to wanting to write crime fiction was a lot of the great works that had a component of social reflection. The writer taking upon themselves to use the crime novel as a framework to take a look at what's going on in society at that given moment. And I think if you freeze your character, sure, you can have the world changing and the character's always 31, but there's a falseness to that. And I just thought that my character should evolve against the city that's evolving. Because, as you live, the longer you live and the greater understanding you have of a place, all those components seem to be part of the, or the necessary part of the verisimilitude that I was trying to get.
Well, your books are very much mysteries are the social novel of today. And in The Black Box, which was your 20th book in Harry Bosch, right? Or 19th?
18th, I think.
Who knows? A lot. But it was your 20 years of writing mystery fiction, and that one you kind of brought it full cycle. You started it with a cold case in 1992, and then brought it up to now. And you looked at a lot of different things going on with Harry. Soldiers, the way things have changed. It really came full force, I think.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to your first question. Did I ever think this would last 20 years? And I really didn't. And so, when I sat down to start writing a book, which I knew would be, I think it would be my 25th novel in 20 years, and both of those numbers were astounding to me.
Yeah.
And so I really treasure that. And so maybe I put an extra dimension of thought into it, but I wanted that book to cover the 20 years. And so, I wanted to anchor it in 92, which was the year my first book came out. It also, on a personal level, was pretty much the last year I was a reporter. I went on a leave to write a book, and I came back for 6 months, so I technically left in 94. but 92 is my last full year as a reporter, and things happened that year that were just amazing. As Dan said, our best day is your worst.
Yeah.
Well, I was involved in covering the riots that took place in 92. They certainly left a mark on me, left a mark on my fiction. So all these things were almost shouting to me, start this book in 1992 during the riots, and then it goes forward from there.
I know you're a big fan of Raymond Chandler. Do you still read the 13th chapter of his little sister every time before you start a book?
I usually read that chapter before I write a Harry Bosch book. Chandler is definitely the greatest influence on me, but for some reason I associate Harry with Chandler, and Mickey Holler's maybe a different origin or something, maybe more of Kill a Mockingbird or Presumed Innocent. So I love the chapter 13 of The Little Sister. It says so much about taking a crime novel and really writing about a city and a time and a place, and so it's an inspiration. And that would be my number one rule, to read that before I start writing about Harry Bosch.
And I read somewhere too that the film The Long Goodbye was kind of a turning point for you too back in college.
Yeah. I mean, along my road, it's littered with serendipity, little things that happened that pivoted me in a new direction. I went to the University of Florida, and this is before DVDs and HBO and all this stuff. And back then, if you missed an R-rated movie, then you pretty much missed it. And
those were the old days.
yeah, and on every Monday they would show a movie that was 2 or 3 years old at the student union, and I used to go to a lot of them. And I happened to see The Long Goodbye. It came out in '73, and I think I saw it in like '76. And even though I was a pretty voracious reader of crime, fiction, and nonfiction, I never read Raymond Chandler because I was really into only contemporary stories, and his stuff was 20 to 30 to 40 years old. So I wasn't interested. But that movie was a contemporary take on the book, The Long Goodbye. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. And I read the book, and it changed my life. And I stopped going to class and started reading all the... No, for about 2 weeks, I didn't go to class, and I just read Chandler's 6 or whatever it is, 7 novels twice. I just read them over. And at the end of those 2 weeks is when I drove down to Fort Lauderdale, sat with my father in the living room, said, it's not going to be Connelly and Sons construction. I don't want to do that. I want to write stories. I want to build stories instead of building houses. So all that came together because I saw that movie.
I think we're all glad that you did not become a builder. I'm sure your buildings would have been beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, you've had some pretty good luck with the movies. Bloodwork, Clint Eastwood directed and starred in, and that was in 2002. You had The Lincoln Lawyer. And what's news on Harry Bosch? Will there be a TV series?
I think there will be. I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit off the beaten path. As in everything, technology is changing things. A lot of people stream television on Netflix and things like that. I think I'm going to end up doing something like that. It's nothing I can formally announce, but I think within a month I'll know where Harry Bosch is going to end up on TV.
Good.
So.
I think you've got a built-in audience here.
Yeah, and the answer to your next question is I don't know.
Okay.
You're going to ask who's going to play Harry Bosch. So that's going to be the toughest question ever.
That will be. I hope it's not Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I think he's got Jack Reacher already. Now
that's funny now, but that does scare me because of the internet, the way people can react to the way someone is cast is scary.
Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah. I mean, Lee.
It can kill a show before it even gets on the air.
Oh yeah. So. Lee Child really got hammered a lot in there.
Right.
About his choice, but he laughed all the way to the bank, right? Your next book is The Gods of Guilt. It comes out in November, correct?
Actually, December 2nd.
December 2nd, okay. I'll put that on my list.
provided I get it finished.
Then what are you doing here?
Exactly.
Is it going to be a Mickey Holler?
Yeah, Mickey Holler. Harry Bosch is in it for like 2 pages.
How'd you come up with Mickey?
Serendipity. Went to a baseball game in LA and started talking to the guy who was sitting next to me, and it turned out he was a lawyer who worked out of the back seat of his Lincoln Town Car. I hate that I get asked that question because I rather have people think I thought it up. Man, the guy's a genius, but no, it landed in my lap like a home run ball or something, And I stayed in touch with him and got the kind of the rudimentary idea of how he worked. But at the time I'd already moved back to Florida. So where I live in Tampa, there's a friend of mine who actually worked at the Sun Sentinel as well here years ago, but now is a criminal defense attorney.
Oh.
And I knew him, and I said, "Can I be a fly on the wall in your life?" And he said, "Fine." And so on and off, I never stopped writing books to research. To me, they're both going on at the same time, and they're multi-levels. You'll be writing one book, and you'll be researching the next. But none of it, neither is full-time. You do a little bit of everything. And anyway, so he would call me from time to time when he had an interesting case, or he was going to a prison to talk to a client or something. And so I got more of a feel for the gritty side of the job from him. And so I kind of wed that to this guy in LA who works out of the backseat of his Lincoln, and that's where it came together.
I like the connection you have between Mickey and Harry. And in the Lincoln Lore, you didn't really mention it too much. But people who read your novels all the way through would know that connection, which is, of course, that Mickey is Harry's half-brother.
Yeah, I mean, you plant seeds. I hate to say it, but sometimes you don't know what you have. I had no idea Lincoln Lawyer would become what it was.
Yeah.
I know I like the character, and so I made his name. I took his name from a very early Harry Bosch book. So the people who are really studiously following the Harry Bosch stories would recognize that name. And if they didn't, that's fine. But it was there that if I wanted to come back to this character, I could explore a connection to the other part of my writing life. I like all my books are connected, even if they don't appear to be. Even the one-offs have connections. Yeah. They're all connected through Harry Bosch. Even a book like Chasing the Dime, which no one's ever read, has Harry in it. He just not by name.
Well, I read that. I was one person. In the Gods of Guilt, what will Mickey be doing then?
Mickey, it's funny, I get a broad idea and I start writing, and then my publisher says, "Can you give us the log line, which is the summary?" And it's like, what? It's very hard for me to boil down the story to like a couple paragraphs, but the Gods of Guilt is a reference to a jury, and it's a murder case that Mickey's doing, but what's unusual about it is it's very much connected to the Lincoln Lawyer story. It's almost a direct sequel to the Lincoln Lawyer story, although it happens 8 years later. But basically, a character in the Lincoln Lawyer, one of Mickey's clients, is murdered, and he liked her a lot. He tried to help her in life, and she gets murdered, and the guy accused of murdering her asked Mickey to defend him, and he has to deal with this: do I want to defend someone who has killed a friend of mine? And it kind of starts that way.
Good. Does journalism still reflect in your novels at all? I mean, you've written about journalism in The Poet and The Scarecrow. Does it still influence your work at all?
I think it does, but I have to admit that I feel out of touch with it because it's changed so much in the last, I left in '94.
Right.
And '94, newspapers weighed a ton, when they would deliver. There was it's a true story. In fact, it's an apocryphal story about the LA Times. It was so heavy one time. It was, the delivery guy threw it out to deliver it to Barbara Bain. Remember her? She
Oh,
was
yeah.
on Mission Impossible. And her little pipsqueak dog was out in the front yard, and then because the Sunday LA Times weighed over 10 pounds. And so when I left, newspapers were fat and happy,
Yeah.
and when the LA Times would send you on a story, they flew you first class. It's a different world now. Technology has changed things, and I'm on the sidelines. So I think journalism is probably reflecting less and less in my work because it all comes back to that verisimilitude. I don't know it as well as I once did. In fact, about 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote a book called The Scarecrow, which was a newspaper story, and I sent it to some friends, a manuscript, who were still in the business, and universally they came back and said, this is a great story, but it should be set in '98 because it's not like the way the newspaper business is now. And so I had to, with their help, rewrite that to kind of bring it up to date. And I don't know, maybe that was too much work or something, but so I've kind of steered away since then.
Yeah. There's, in each of your Harry Bosch novels, there's always one constant scene, and that's with Harry out on his patio, kind of overlooking the city. Why is that?
Well, I think all stories should have some air in them, like moments of contemplation. And, you talk about, in writing schools in particular, they seem to break things down like character and place and plot. And there's really no breakdown. All these things are part of the same thing. They're all character. And I always just, from the start, I viewed this idea that Harry would have a house up high where he could overlook the city, and the place where he is chosen by specific design because you can see everything. You can see the freeways, which are so much part of Los Angeles culture. You can see the hills, you can see coyotes, you can see the studios. So he would have a glimpse of everything that is LA, and that he could kind of commune with it and try to figure out what his place is in this place. And so it kind of went from there, and they're important. They're really important scenes. It's funny. I'm flying out to LA tomorrow to talk to directors about directing a Harry Bosch television pilot, and one of the guys who wants the job was talking to me on the phone, and he said, the scenes on the back deck are more important than Harry Bosch on his back deck is more important than Harry Bosch at a crime scene. And I said, you got the job.
All right.
So.
All right. I have more questions, but I think you people have some too. So who would like to ask Michael some questions? Yes?
When Harry retired, can he become a private detective?
Yeah, I should repeat.
Will Harry become a private detective when he retires?
He'll become something. I mean, her question earlier about charting the end of his retirement doesn't necessarily mean the end of Harry Bosch. It's going to be tough though when he doesn't have the badge and the gun officially. I did that. I don't know if you remember. I made the one mistake, or I probably made lots of mistakes, but the big mistake I made in this series was I retired him too early. I found a realistic way of getting him back on the force, but I wrote a book when he wasn't a cop and he was kind of a private detective. And when I was writing that, as much as I like that book, in fact, it's called Lost Light, and it has some aspects about it that are my favorite that I've written. In fact, I think it's my favorite first 2 pages of any book I've written. But I realized there's a dimension I've lost here, and that is the bureaucracy and politics of the police department and how Harry deals with it. I think he's been able to strike empathic chords with readers because of the way he deals with stuff we all deal with. We might not be cops and all that, but we all deal with bureaucracy, and we all deal with, this common disregard of bureaucrats and so forth. And I was losing a lot of that by taking him out of the police department. So I realized I may have killed the series because I'm not going to be able to sustain my creative zeal for Harry in this situation. And luckily a new police chief came in in real life in the LAPD, and the first thing he said was, all our good guys of all this experience have retired because of all the scandals we have. So we're left with a very inexperienced detective ranks. And so he went out of his way he called up one guy who's one of my friends and sources. He had retired and moved all the way to Maine. He called him up and got him to come back. And so that was happening at the same time I was having this issue. And I thought, again, serendipity, something has landed in my lap. I can get Harry back on the force. And so I did, and now we've gone almost another 10 years. And so as Harry is going to retire soon, maybe 1 or 2 more books, I fear that I'm going to face that same dilemma, and so I won't want to write about Harry as the 65-year-old private detective. If you're reading the books, you can see what I'm doing. I'm setting his daughter up to possibly continue, and then so Harry would be around, but maybe in the background, kind of like a guardian angel type guy. And these are all things that may or may not happen. I don't really plan too far ahead, but I do plant a lot of seeds.
The gentleman in the second row, yes, you.
So, why don't you write a book about Fort Lauderdale?
Yeah, Michael, why don't you write a book about Fort Lauderdale?
Good question. I have one, actually, I wrote about 25 years ago. No, I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to answer that because everything seemed to come together for me when I moved to Los Angeles. And in a way, it became my muse. And then it became what I became known for. And so I'm not sure I want to play with that. And for sure, I'm not tired of writing about Los Angeles. And so I'd never say never about anything. I mean, I think it would be a really kind of fantastic thing to come back and write about my hometown. But something has to happen. It's kind of like a lightning strike where you instinctively know you can, for me, it's about 11 months. I need 11 months to write a story. And it becomes hard work if you're not really plugged into it. So I have to be very careful in what I choose to do, and I have to really know in my heart that I can do this, I can carry this story and this character for the next 11 months. And if that would happen to me about Fort Lauderdale or where I live now in Tampa, then I would do it in a minute. But so far, that hasn't happened to me.
I think you had a question?
What of you, Michael? What in your personality do you see in Harry Bosch and in Mickey Haller?
What is Michael's personality in Harry and Mickey?
I don't think there's a lot of personality. I mean, we have stuff in common. All 3 of us have daughters around the same age, and through our daughters, we're learning about a different part of the world or a new view of the world. And so I certainly share that with those guys and on different levels. In fact, in the book I'm writing now, Mickey Haller, his daughter's not talking to him because of some of the people he's defended. And he has to deal with that, hardship, heartbreak. But otherwise, I think Harry Bosch, I personally identify more with Harry. I view Mickey Haller as more a reporting project. I spend way more time with lawyers trying to get the nuances of that world right as opposed to spending time with detectives. I do spend time with detectives, but I just kind of feel I'm closer to Harry and know how he would think. I think we're both, the bottom line is we're hopeful cynics, especially when it comes to the city of Los Angeles. And I think it starts from there. That's the way I view LA, that's the way he views LA, and through these books, I can make what I think about it come out of his mouth and his thoughts. So I would say his personality is closer to mine.
Other questions? Yeah.
Have you ever contemplated ending the Harry Bosch series in the way of the remorseful days like Helen Baker?
Oh, no. You want to kill Harry?
Well, you only say that if I contemplated it. Yeah, I mean, you have to contemplate that. What is the best way to finish the story? And and I used to think in terms of how I would do it, and I had this idea that Harry would get cancer, and he would set up this elaborate thing so it looked like he'd been killed by someone, but it was really suicide, and all this stuff. And then somewhere along the line, I realized that, you know, I never saw this coming, that he would last this long. And in each book, I put him through some really tough times, thinking, you know, there'd only be 3 or maybe there'd be 5, and now I'm up to 18. And so he's had a really torturous path. And so, you know, so I mean, I know we're talking about someone that doesn't exist, so I don't want to get all choked up, but I just think it would be really sad if he went through all that to be stopped by a bullet.
What rate do you know? That's ridiculous. Great book. That'd be your biggest seller of all time.
All right, you changed my mind.
Do we want to show our hands or something?
Go ahead.
In all of your books where you describe Harry Bosch as a comrade in Vietnam, I tell my husband, who is a Vietnam veteran, about his experiences as a comrade, and he says that is spot on. So my question to you is, how did you come up with the story being a comrade in Vietnam?
You know, it's weird. I should have, when you asked the question of how Fort Lauderdale formed you, that's another one. I used to work on my summer jobs. I'd work on construction crews for Arvida. My father worked for Arvida, remember that company? And I would get jobs, and I was on a construction crew with a guy who had been a tunnel rat in Vietnam. And he wouldn't talk about it, which made it all the more mysterious and scary to me. And something bad had happened to him. He covered scars on his face by growing a beard. And I was extremely intrigued by this guy. He also had a lot of issues and social adjustment coming back from that experience. And so thoughts of him have infected or carried forward in my life. And then I moved to LA, and you know, the first day there was this heist where these guys used tunnels to get up there. And in a crashing moment, it all came together to me that I would write about this in a fictional way of a detective who had experience in tunnels. And he would connect to the people who committed this robbery. It was like in a moment I knew this is what I would do. So it was, you know, weird.
This gentleman in blue had his hand up.
That Irving is one of these ones where I didn't know the longevity of the series, and he was already pretty old. And so I every time I think of bringing him back, I know I'm screwing around with the space-time continuum, because he really should be about 80, and he should not, you know. And actually they have elected city councilmen that are that old in LA, and so that I did that with him. But I don't know what else I can do. But what's been interesting in shifting towards making a television show is he's a very interesting character, and the people I'm dealing with say he's absolutely going to be a character on the show. So we might not see him in pages unless I do flashback stuff. You know, going to somebody's question about what happens when Harry retires. Well, I can still go back in time and fill in Harry in the 70s and Harry in the 80s and things like that. It doesn't intrigue me as much. I really like the forward contemporary progression of the series. But when I run out of room going that way, I do have all this back here I can go to.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, could you describe a day of your writing life, and do you write in the same place?
Well, I fly to Fort Lauderdale, and I'm writing on the plane. And I check into a room and write in the room. No, I try to start early, like around 5 a.m. And if I can write I take a break to take my kid to school. And if I can write till lunchtime, that's a good day. But oftentimes I have a better day, and I keep going after lunch. But I know that if I can spend those many hours a day, I will move my story forward a step a day. And that would be 5 steps a week or 6 steps a week. And you know, in my head, I'm thinking almost about the math, that if I do this, I know I will have a draft in X amount of months, and then I can rewrite it. And it's all about being able to kind of keep a schedule. So there's a little bit of OCD involved, but it serves me. And you know, I don't have, no one is forcing deadlines on me. I write at a pace that I've elected to write at. It happens to be at least one book a year, and I have no problems reaching that goal if I kind of keep this kind of schedule.
Other questions? Yes.
Your time and craft in newspapers informs your work so much. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the future of newspapers in general and how you think it's also informed so much of other crime and mystery writers' work. As newspapers change, how do you think that might impact America's fictional legacy?
Well, it's weird. I'm of two minds because obviously technological advances are changing people's tastes and how they consume news, how they consume novels, and something is always lost, and then you've got to question whether how much is gained. It's rough. I mean, you know, the local newspaper is always a tentpole for a community, you know, a place to get the information they need. And that's kind of being, you know, dissolved across the internet and other places as people change the way they consume news. You know, you can always hope for an equilibrium. I think newspapers are finding that it, you know, to really extremely focus on local news is a way of surviving. You know, congratulations to Sun Sentinel for just winning the Pulitzer Prize, and I think that comes out of it comes out of that evolving to what we're doing and what is our position now in society. So maybe we don't have to send people to Afghanistan. We just got to make sure we got everything covered here in Broward County. And you know, and I think that might be a way to survive. You know, but at the same time, stuff is lost, and that's why something like Broward Bulldog, where you have some really experienced investigative reporters still knocking stuff out of the park, you know, and the hope is that it will be paid attention to and it will be noticed, and that all these things can survive together.
We have time for one more question. Okay, you've had one. This lady right here.
I just wondered if you're still in touch with the specialist in the Raymond Stewart who done the research at the beginning that still inspired you, or not?
He passed away a few years ago. I had limited contact with him, but I had email contact with him. He retired up to the Panhandle of Florida, which is not one of the places I go to often. But but what it was nice about it is I've talked about him, not everywhere I go, but I've talked about him, and that's gotten back to him, so he knew about it. You know, there was another detective that was on that same squad that week I had a bad history with when I was the witness when I was 16. He was one of the first guys to interview me. And he wanted me to identify, they rounded up a bunch of suspects they thought might have been the shooter, and they wanted me to identify one, and I kept saying you don't have him. And he thought I was afraid to make the identification, and so it ended pretty badly. And I felt really disappointed, like I'm just being honest here, but I felt like I had let him down. It was a weird psychological thing, and maybe it had something to do with why I read a lot of crime fiction and true crime books. So then years later, I walk into that same squad room, and I'm the reporter, and he's there, and he still didn't believe he still thought I was afraid to identify the bad guy, and they never made an arrest in that case. Anyway, he's still in touch with me, but not in a good way. So,
Michael will be signing books in the Breezeway. Murder on the Beach will still be selling books for a while. And if you have any other questions for Michael, when he's signing your book, you'll have time to talk to him. Thank you all so much for coming.
thank you. Thanks, that was great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Michael.